Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SRE Report 2024, what the charts don't tell you, or maybe what the charts could not tell you. My name is Leo Vasiliou. Before I came to work at Catchpoint, where I've been for 10 years, I used to work at Ask, formerly Ask Jeeves, in the production operations team, and enjoy writing the report for the past 4 years, and I hope everyone has a little bit of fun, gets a little bit of insightful nuggets out of today's call. Steve, maybe say hello, introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Steve McGhee. I started at Google about 19 years ago, and I was an SRE for a little over a decade there. At one point, I left. I joined, the internet. I was a customer of all the clouds, and I worked with all the vendors and like all the tools and all the consultants. And I learned a lot about how the real world works. Since then, I've come back to Google, and I basically help Google Cloud customers build more reliable systems. So right now, I'm a reliability advocate, which is a title I just made up. Kurt, how about you?
Very good. I am currently working as an infrastructure software architect for Clari. Before that, I've worked in the incident management space and worked as an SRE at LinkedIn. And before that, the term SRE hadn't been invented, although I did kind of the same role in some ways for HP and IBM before that. So back to you, Leo.
Fantastic. So thank you for the introductions, and thank you for everyone who decided to give us some of your precious time today. Before we jump in, we'll just cover a few housekeeping items. If I could direct your attention to the menu on the top right-ish of your screen, notice the chat tab. So feel free to say hello in the chat tab. In the docs, we have a link to the report for your reading pleasure. The Q&A tab, which is the mechanism we will use to allow people to come on stage. So if you go to the Q&A tab, to the video Q&A, and raise your hand, then that will give you the opportunity to join us on stage and maybe offer a comment, ask us a question live, and otherwise participate instead of just listening in the audience. So feel free to navigate there, click that raise hand button, and we will bring you on stage and hear what you have to say. Otherwise, let us jump in, shall we? So here we go. So this, there's a reason we put this here, and it has to do with the fact that, when they're teaching people language phonetics, they use this this concept of gibberish words to help people understand how language works. And so it's that idea of like some gibberish data. Well, one, you might get a little bit of chuckle. Take a look at the site there and get some of the chuckles there. But otherwise, the idea is that when you look at these data sets, right, you maybe look at them and immediately say, oh, that doesn't make any sense, right? That's a spurious correlation. But sometimes you might not. So we just wanted to set the stage for that as we now get into some of the insights from the report for discussion. So let's talk through this first one here. Now, the question as worded in the survey was very simply, do you agree practitioners should tactically monitor productivity or experience impacting endpoints, even if outside your physical control? And then we also broke this question down by rank. This is something that's come up for a couple of years now, and we decided to put it in the survey this year. So as you can see, pretty much the aggregate was in the majority of the agree range, but also in a rare alignment of, we could say, organizational ranks. All ranks of the organization were also in the agree range, which was powerful reinforcement because, like I said, most of the times when we do these breakdowns by rank, there's quite a bit of dissension. And so if we now go to the next slide, keeping in mind that there was a 0 to 10 scale, where 0 was the extreme disagreement and 10 was the extreme agreement. If they chose 0 or 1, an optional question popped up like, hey, why did you disagree so strongly? If they chose 9 to 10, the question was, why did you agree so strongly? So I guess, Steve, we'll start with the question for you is like, Google is probably one of the most monitored set of endpoints in the world. And I have to believe some of that monitoring is not done by Google. So how does that make you feel? How do you think about this data? What comes to mind when you see the previous rating question, but also some of the comments here on the screen?
Yeah, the idea of Google being always on is something that we didn't intend. It just kind of worked out that way. We've seen lots of people use, ping Google or measure the network latency to Google as like a dial tone to measure to baseline off of, and we're totally fine with that. Please keep doing that. That's cool. The comments here though, they hurt. They hurt me in the core, right? Because like monitoring is a deep aspect of my personality. Specifically, like if we remember, like in the previous slide, there was like 30% of people were not sure about this. 10% were like, no, definitely not. But like 30% saying I'm not sure still is like, So like I think the underlying problem here is that often when you have like a very, I don't want to like say shallow or naive, but like kind of like an early interpretation of what monitoring means, the expectation is that I reach out to look at a thing and it either tells me, good or bad. And that's it. Whereas like the more nuanced approach is that you actually go out and you touch a lot of different things and you don't actually know what you're going to use that data for later. It's just situational awareness, right? And so something as simple as establishing a baseline that is outside of your system in order to make comparisons to is a perfectly valid, rational thing to do. But when you look at it in isolation, you're like, why are we measuring that thing over there? Because we're running the thing over here. And so when I see someone saying like, we monitor what we're paid to monitor, it's like, yes, but also we need to have a little bit of context as well. So basically, when folks have this position, I try not to just, tell them they're wrong, but instead like open the world of like a more diverse set of inputs and show them that they're not evaluating a single thing. They're looking at a system of things, and some of that system is outside of their particular control, but it's important to know that the context of that entire system. Is that hand wavy enough for you to get started, Lou? What do you think?
Yeah, and if I could just kind of share a quick anecdote here. So to everyone who is giving us their time today, Kurt, myself, Steve, we work together to write the survey questions, which form the basis for the insights that go into the report. And after we wrote this year's survey, someone said, Dr. Laura McGuire, she said, Leo, you should really check out this research from Sarah and Alex. Their research has been on this idea of the multi-party dilemma, which is the idea of stuff outside the four walls of your organization needs to be federated into your various playbooks, mechanisms. And I just thought it was a wonderful reinforcement because it said to me, hey, wow, we had put this series of questions into the survey because it was something that we had been talking about, but to hear that this was actually a thing outside of just what we were thinking, again, after we wrote the survey, I thought it was a fortuitous bounce. And so the other thing that catches my eye with this is on the disagree comments. Again, remember that it was the minority range, but even still, which means there was less comments on this optional question. The multiple comments about the lack of actionability kind of stuck out to me. And so, Kurt, maybe this one is for you, is like this idea of like, oh, it's outside my control, can't take any action, I'm not going to do it. What does this idea of monitoring visibility mean for reliability practices? Has that always been the case? Have people always thought about it like that, or has this gravity toward the scope being only for first party stuff, is that changing, or has it been changing all along? What do you think, Kurt?
I think that to some extent, what Steve described in terms of having a situational awareness of what's happening in the world is right on the mark. But one of the things that has changed over time is that there's been a greater degree of this reliance on third parties. So if you go back to, I don't know, we'll say the dot-com boom of the late 90s, everybody had to build their own because there weren't these third-party services that you could call on for doing monitoring or for doing your CDNs. Well, yes, there were CDNs then, but certainly not to the degree they're here now. But a service like Cloudflare wasn't present at that time. Now there are SaaS vendors for everything, practically, and companies are rightfully making use of them. So it behooves them to become more aware of what are their dependencies and how are their dependencies behaving to a degree that they didn't have to before because all the dependencies were in-house before. And just as a trend of relying on utility services, in a sense, as opposed to building everything yourself, if you think about it from a Wordly map perspective.
Makes sense. And I think the idea, we talked about the federation concept. I think it's just going to become more and more of a need as people realize this. So I agree. All right. So then if we continue to move on, because we do have a couple of conversation starters here. So these next couple of slides, little thoughts, pontification on the learning from incidents section. Again, if anyone is interested in offering a comment or raising a question about some of the LFI stuff, then please raise your hand, join us on stage. But otherwise, let's dissect this one here. So the question was, in which incident areas could your organization most improve upon? And the aggregate response was emphasize learning versus fixing. We started to do the breakdowns by dimensions in last year's report, right? Breakdowns of how people answered these questions by rank, by company size. And when we broke this one down by company size, it, so right, 0 to 100 employees, 101 to 1,000 employees, et cetera, all the way up to, I think the largest bucket was more than 100,000 employees. This answer, unlike the other answers here, did not trend up or down, and it was consistently the number one answer across all of the company sizes. But I want to ask you, and Kurt, maybe this one is for you, is like learning from incidents. It's like, well, yeah, of course we learn from incidents, but what exactly do the LFI community want us to know that LFI, what do they want us to know that encapsulates? What do we mean when we say learning from incidents? I mean, because I got to believe it's more than just saying, yeah, I learned. I got to believe there's a bit more to it than that. So Kurt, what are your thoughts here?
Well, when you were looking to learn from incidents, we're looking to improve the mental models that everybody in the organization, ideally everyone in the organization, has about how our systems work. Not only the computer side of it, but also the people side of it, because we like to say that we're in a socio-technical system here, where people are interacting with the machines, which are interacting with our customers. And the better that you can understand the system dynamics, the more effectively you can design your systems, you can design your processes, you can adapt them over time. And that's really the key to learning from incidents, is that adaptive response. Being able to be prepared when things go wrong, because they do go wrong, and being able to make effective interventions, both in the people side and in the system side, to bring things back on course. Ideally, you get to the point where you can actually anticipate what's happening. You can say, oh, we know that next month we're going to have a surge in usage because, hey, it's Black Friday. And as a result, we need to harden our systems in these ways to be able to accommodate that anticipated surge, as opposed to getting hit on the side of the head when your systems fall over. So those are the kinds of things that we look for in learning from incidents.
Do you think we'll be able to learn in order to prevent all incidents?
Oh, no.
Yes,
No.
sarcastically.
No, I mean, there will still be incidents. The question in those cases becomes learning and developing procedures to effectively deal with the incidents, because there will always be incidents, and some can be prevented, but then the others need to be responded to effectively.
How about you, Steve? What do
Yeah.
you think? Anything else jump out at you?
Totally agree. One point at the very end of Kurt's thing is that the response doesn't have to be necessarily a human. Also, a
Right.
robust system can respond to a known failure mode. That still is considered like a form of response if the system itself can actually not adapt, but be robust to a failure mode. But that someone has to have put that responsiveness into the system, and they will have to have known enough about the system and enough about that failure mode and about that risk in order to see that coming and to introduce that response into the system. So this is what we mean by learning. But stepping back, I have mixed feelings about this response at the top. Like, I'm really happy that this is on the top of so many people's minds, but also this isn't saying what is the best thing that we do today. This is saying what is something that we can improve on. And so if half the, 47%, if about half the folks out there are saying we should improve the way that we're learning, it's either because they don't do it today and they know they should, right? Because let's look at the inverse of that. If you don't respond as this is the most important thing, there's two reasons why you wouldn't respond this way. One would be we're already doing it perfectly. We're very good at learning from our system. The other one is we don't value this, right? We don't think we should be doing this. And either of those would be bad, right? Or sorry, I think that the second one would be bad. The first one, I think you would be kind of lying to yourself. So like, it's unlikely that you're perfect at learning from your system already, but regardless. So my point here is that my biggest concern with this, even though this is looks like a good statistic in terms of everyone are heading in the right direction, I think this is still sort of like a well publicized thing to think about and to care about, but I think a lot of folks still don't quite know what to do here. And also they're having trouble rationalizing it, and they're having trouble actually getting it to happen, right? And so they're saying we want to do this thing more that we've heard of, but we're not doing it for some reason. So now the question is, well, why aren't they doing it? Are they being told not to do it? Do they not have time in their schedule to do it? Are they not sure how to articulate what it is they're going to do? Right? Because this is a thing when you my biggest kind of gripe with the phrase learning from incidents is it sounds too simple, right? Like we know that it's really deep and really tough and really important, but like if you go to, you know, the pointy haired boss who doesn't get it and say like, we want to learn from our incidents, they'll be like, cool, like get a book, like learn stuff. I don't care. Like that's easy. Like you guys, we pay you to be smart. Like, what do you mean you want to learn some more stuff? Like you already learned computer science. That should be enough, you know? I mean, this is obviously a made up scenario. Like I said, I don't mean to be disparaging to executives or anything, but like often this is just the problem that we're not really articulating in terms of like specific scenarios, like what learning from incidents might look like when we just say the phrase learning from incidents. So getting deeper into it and giving a bunch of examples and showing like, here's a case where this team learned this thing about this thing, and then they were able to make this change, they were able to adapt and blah, 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 blah. And then showing a few of these over and over again, that's when it really starts to click and people say, like, yes, we actually do want that. Like that's a good idea. So this is kind of my too many words response to this slide, is that like, I'm happy that people are interested in this, but I'm sad that they're interested in it and they're not doing it. So if you know what I mean. So,
and I want to piggyback a little bit on something you pointed out there, Steve. And one of the challenges we have in developing the survey and putting the questions together is coming up with wording that will be clear and I'd like to say unambiguous, but the English language or any language doesn't lend itself to non-ambiguity other than mathematics, maybe. So it's always, you have to be careful how you interpret these things, because this survey goes out to the world, essentially. We have hundreds of respondents. They don't necessarily interpret the questions the same way that we were interpreting them when we wrote them or intending them when we wrote them. But we also can't write a paragraph or more, a novel maybe, explaining how we're intending the questions when we send them out. So that's one of the real challenges in putting a survey together.
Yeah. One more thing to point out about this just graph overall, like I think there's actually kind of just, if you look at all of the responses, there's almost just like two camps showing up. There's the, we want to learn from the stuff, and then there's the, we want to do the fixes, right? And you know, arguably those don't necessarily look like two different camps at first, but having seen a lot of different companies and having worked with a lot of groups, like I think there are two ways of thinking about this. And one is enumerate all the problems, like go look at the incident, find what the problems were, write them down and check them off. And that's completing action items and creating action items, which is kind of in the middle here. And that sounds perfectly reasonable. Like, yes, those sound like good things to do, but that has like an implicit, implication that you can do that, right? That the ability that you can just enumerate all those problems, you know, sort of a priori, just from the scenario that, you know, without too much analysis, without too much thought, you just write it down. Like, just tell me what broke. It can't be that hard. This is a really dangerous position to lean into without also then adding the second way of thinking, which is the learning versus fixing, the cross-incident analysis, the writing the reports, and the facilitating a review. Without those things in place, that list that you create is just going to be busy work. You might get lucky. You might fix some things that are critical, but like, frankly, like you're probably going to miss the big stuff. And you're also going to miss the stuff that is cross incident, right? The stuff that is really deep in the bones of your company, of like, we keep making the same mistake because we're not, investing in some area of research or something like that. So I pull out these two action item things as people want to get better at these action item things. And I kind of want to say, like, don't just do that. Make sure you're also doing these other things as well. So it's hard to tell people, actually, there's more you have to do. The system is harder. The work is harder than you thought it was, but that's probably the case in this scenario.
And on that comment, honing in on the facilitating the review, right? Facilitating blameless review. Kurt, what what's the relationship between LFI and blameless? Is there one? Does one preclude the other? Can they be mutually exclusive? Like, describe the relationship between those?
Well, last year we kind of explored this concept of the blameless postmortem or retrospective or whatever, post-incident review, whatever people care to call it, in when we did the survey last year, Leo. And blamelessness is, well, there's debate around the terminology again in this case. But the idea of blamelessness is a shorthand way of saying that we have psychological safety, which has been explored by researchers and academics and showed up notably in Google's Project Aristotle in terms of team output, that the best teams are ones where the members have psychological safety. And likewise, in the context of doing a post-incident review, if people don't feel safe to raise concerns or to say, I didn't know this, or hey, I just learned X, Y, Z about our new system, or old system, as the case may be, then you're not going to get a full picture of what went on. And that's going to impair your learning. Some of the research has shown that without that sense of safety, um, people's emotions go into a defensive mode. And when you're defensive, you can't learn effectively. That's been shown in various research studies that if you make someone defensive, their barriers go up, which means they're not learning things. And so in some ways, that's a fundamental uh, prerequisite to effective learning, whether you're learning from incidents or learning from anything else.
Yeah.
So
One more
go ahead.
one more bit on that is like just as an example of what Kurt is talking about. If you have a team that is like unsafe feeling, right, and they've been just beaten down, when an incident occurs, it's really, really unlikely that someone's going to put out a wild hypothesis. What if it's the thing, right? What if it's the new thing we just did that everyone's proud of and it's just not working right? Like if that's entirely like that's a great suggestion. Like it might be that new thing that we just launched, but actually it has this weird side effect and it's causing this problem. In a psychologically unsafe environment, no one's going to raise their hand and suggest that because no one wants to question the great success we just had last week because wasn't it great? And it was so hard to get there. This happens a lot, right? And that means that no one is suggesting the immediate cause potentially. And so everyone just skirts around it. And this is when you end up with a bunch of incidents where you kind of go, I don't know, could be anything, right? And no one likes being in that position. And this, from our experience specifically at Google, often comes like you can correlate this directly to the psychological safety of teams. If they are like measurably psychologically safe, they tend to have more resilient teams and they tend to have more robust systems because people can engage in this conversation where they question the validity of the current system and they make changes to it. I've tweeted in the past, it's one of my favorite phrases, is that you can't tell an SRE to stay in their lane, right? You can't tell them, no, you can't ask that question, because the whole point of SRE is to think of the entire system and say like, well, what about the thing, right? And you can only do that in an environment where your team is psychologically safe. So it's critical.
And this, I mean, the DORA studies have shown that the psychological safety is a factor not only after things go wrong in incidents, but it's also a factor in the most productive, highest performing software teams that have been studied through the DORA report for 10 years now, something. Yep. As a key component. It shows up in the DORA report as being part of a generative culture type in the Westrom typology.
That's right.
So give that protected time. So moving on again, feel free to raise your hand in the Q&A, the video Q&A, if you want to come on, offer a comment. But otherwise, Steve, let's take a peek at this one here. So who leads or drives post-incident work? Now, we're not going to read all the labels, but we're just going to call attention to that middle-ish category there, the dedicated incident team. So this was, as you can see, the only response that, with the exception of barely noticeable customer support there, this was the only category that trended up as company size trended up. Mm-hmm. What do you make of this? Is this spurious or no? What do you think, Steve?
I think this is a historical artifact. So my impression, given the companies that I talk to and what we talk about, and whom in the company I tend to talk to, basically when I go and talk to a company, it tends to be about what do we do when stuff breaks, right? It's like, how do we make a system more robust? What do we do about DR, right? What do we do? Like, should we make an SRE team? Stuff like that. So the folks that come and talk to me about these things vary dramatically in a similar fashion to this graph, which I think is fascinating, which is when I talk to a Fortune 1000 company or a Fortune 500 company or whatever, like a large company, I'm almost every single time I'm talking to like the IT or the risk management or the problem management team, which was a title I had never heard of before I left Google. I was like, what is that? Specifically, there's something called ITIL or ITSM. And often this is a group of like IT professionals within an organization whose job is to, well, part of ITIL, I should say, the problem management is to be the one core team in the middle of the company that handles incidents. And this is like explicit in the little ITIL book is you should have a team. They should do these things. They should follow these procedures. In my opinion, in modern distributed complex internet systems, this is an anti-pattern at this point. I understand where it came from, and it has its place still in many, many systems out there. But in these complex systems that are moving very quickly and they're built on agile systems like on the cloud, I think this actually just gets in the way. And so I think what we're seeing here, where we have like the large company tends to have a dedicated incident team, it's because of that. That's just my guess. The other thing that might be happening is often we find, even if you're following like a more modern model, like the SRE model in the Google books, you'll have what we call incident commanders. Often these folks, well, the model that we use internally to Google is that people who are incident commanders are a member of the team that is responsible for the product. They just kind of don the hat of incident commander during the incident. But we've seen this interpreted in different ways. We've seen where companies will hire a team, and that team will be composed entirely of incident commanders, and they will all sort of like live together in a little group. And then when a bad thing happens, you page that team of incident commanders who doesn't know anything about your service, but they've been trained in the ways of incident command. Which again, I think it's a misinterpretation of what it is that we're trying to achieve here. I understand where it comes from. I understand the intent, but I don't think it's a good idea. So both of these things together can result in what we're seeing here, which is we have a big organization. Let's like kind of group this one complicated thing we don't understand into one smaller team within the organization and let them just be in charge of it. When really what you want to do is you want to spread this knowledge across the entire team. Like I would prefer, instead of a dedicated incident response team, you have a dedicated incident response education team. And their job is to go out and teach everybody else how to do this job. And then the work actually gets done across the board. And that makes the people on the left of this entire slide more responsible for the systems and driving the incident response. Does that make sense?
I like your idea of having the dedicated education team. I think that's a great way to position it, Steve, because I've seen a similar kind of thing. But I've also seen the case in companies where they want to do, and this kind of comes from the safety profession side of the world. where they want to do in-depth analysis on a select number of incidents. And doing an in-depth analysis can easily take you, we'll just say, a week of time, if not more, depending on how many people you interview and how you compile the results. Um, Smaller companies can't afford that level of investment. And while they may or may not form a dedicated team, just if you're putting 1/10 of an FTE toward this per X number of incidents or services, eventually you're going to get to the point where you've got 2 or 3 FTE potentially focused on doing incident analysis, let's say. I think it would be a great compliment to make sure that they are also doing the education and pushing that information out effectively amongst the organization. But that's to me what I see going on here with a dedicated team is just an aggregation of fractional headcount. In a large enough company, it can support a team of more than one person, essentially, who may spend most of their time doing something specifically with incidents.
Yeah, there's a little confusion here in the wording, of course, because wording is hard, like we mentioned. But like, post incident work can be two things in my mind. One is, okay, the fire is out. Write down the stuff and the what went on in this incident, and that should, I believe, be distributed. That should be the
Yep.
person closest to the fire, right? The person who understands the system best, not a centralized team. However, the other thing that this might imply is now go look at all of those incident reports, which were all written by all these experts, and draw some conclusions. And this is basically a business analyst. Like this can be
Mhm.
this could be a consultant. Like this could be its own company, for
Yep.
God's sakes. Like
Yep.
and that I think is perfectly reasonable. This is the thing you were talking about, where if you have a large enough company, you get all this fractional headcount and it all crystallizes into one centralized team. Perfectly reasonable. So this, we might be seeing a mixture of these two things being presented here in this graph.
And I think some of the comments to the question in the chat: do you maintain a database, knowledge base where you can run analytics? And I kind of infer, essentially to sort of learn. I'll just make one comment on that, and then if either of you have anything to add, one of the data points from this year's reports had to do with the fact to whether or not incidents were ticketed versus non-ticketed. There was a surprisingly high percent of practitioners who said they respond to dozens or hundreds of non-ticketed incidents as well. So no analytics or anything like that. But I would say that, yeah, essentially, and I mean, these types of tools, platforms for your ticketed incidents, combined with some of the AI stuff that comes to mind when I think about it, probably is a foundational component of that as well. So I don't know if you had any other thoughts, but the ticketed versus non-ticketed was something that we mentioned in this particular section.
It's I think having some sort of tracking system is really valuable, although it may not be the silver bullet that management would like to think it would be. There've been a number of talks from some folks from Google, and I've seen one from somebody at Microsoft where they tried to go back through this historic repository, even just over the course of a couple of years worth of incidents, and try to see if they could abstract useful information from it. And the upshot of the talks was it was really hard, and it didn't have any clear uh, low-hanging fruit that fell out on my head as I looked at it, kind of a thing. So.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if we consider the range of doing this, there's don't ever write anything down ever, just like YOLO all incidents and just like cowboy it. Obviously a bad idea. And the other side of this range is, have a very structured, system, and everything gets recorded in fine detail, and it's very analyzable, and we draw like these amazing conclusions from. Both of these are false, I think. I think you end up in the middle because no one's going to spend too much time like filling out the perfect form, right? Generating, like creating the perfect form to begin with, like what are all the fields and stuff, because every incident is different. Let alone trying to find some, shining light in the analysis of such a perfect data set. That said, we don't want to be all the way on the left, right? We don't want to YOLO everything. We want to write some stuff down, right? We do want to record it, because there are benefits that are just, if anything, they're tactical. They're like, this happened again. Like we had it 2 days ago. It was incident 20509. Like, you guys remember that one? Yeah. Okay. It was terrible. We did it again. We're going to do it again in 2 weeks if we don't fix the thing, right? Like the very like clear repeating incidents, those are perfectly trackable, traceable, right? We know we want to fix those. The like, how do we go in and find like the deeper cause through like AI? I don't know about that, right? That's a bit of a stretch, right? But I would suggest like finding that middle road there. Yes, like write things down, put them in a database, look at the database occasionally, but don't expect to, solve world hunger this way. This isn't, that's not the path to enlightenment. It's just a tool. So maybe I'm wrong. I'd love to be proven wrong, but so far that's how I've seen it work.
Moving on to, no one monitoring tool does it all, and in the darkness bind them. So section contribution from Leon Johnson. This section did a couple of things. The data question, how many monitoring tools does your org use? So we asked that because we wanted to corroborate with other research and other reports that we've seen over the years. And so TLDR, companies use a lot of tools to monitor different things. So this report just sort of corroborates that. But what we didn't see, or what we haven't seen in some of these other pieces of research, is the why. So we took a stab at writing it this year. And as you can see, the top two answers, they monitor different things, right? Different features, maybe for different use cases. We tried not to be prescriptive in this year's report because, some of the feedback from the first rounders was that people can look at the exact same set of data and infer different or extrapolate, sort of different insights, if you will. So we kind of took this and we just wrote, hopefully, what was a sufficiently leveled piece of rhetoric that's like this use of multiple monitoring tools year after year after year versus, the rhetoric that we've seen of like combine everything in a single tool. We took the approach that, maybe that's a bit of a fallacy. Maybe, there is no idea of combining everything in a single tool, but instead that it's purposeful, that you're going to need different tools. So Steve, maybe this one's just for you before we quickly move on to the next one was the approach that maybe this idea of being able to use one tool for everything is a fallacy? Was that the correct way for us to think about it this year, or no, not really, or something else entirely?
I think again, I wish the data were more rich, but it's not, right? Like surveys are restricted in many ways. Like ideally, what I'd like to see is sort of like a multi-generational, like a time series of this over time. So we can see like how are companies evolving their use of these tools, and I don't mean like in aggregate. I mean like individual companies. Like, is there a class of company that expands and contracts and expands and contracts and expands? I'd expect something like that. And then is there a class of companies that just adds and adds and adds and adds and adds? And is there a class of company that like just found the perfect system and just has one and it's great? And then the question is like, how many companies are in each of these categories? Or, there's probably more categories too, but like, and then over time, are more companies getting into that last category of we found the perfect tool? My guess is no. Are more companies getting into the, add and add and add and add category? My guess is yes. right? And then you can get into further questions of like, why are we adding and adding and adding and adding forever and not reducing? Like, why are we not fluctuating, or why are we fluctuating? Things like that. So basically, like all survey questions, like the reality is much more complex than the question implies. But I think that one thing that we've found is that this has been consistently the case where it's complicated, and not all monitoring systems are created the same. And what we want out of a monitoring system isn't exactly what's offered. And this is like what the capitalist market is trying to solve for us. And it's imperfect, and it's not, speed of light. So like we have to be able to have these conversations with our vendors where we're saying what it is that we're trying to achieve and why this isn't working. And things like when vendors try to get us to do everything in one tool and try to lock you in with, credits and cost and all this other thing, that actually slows this process down. Like it's good for that one vendor, but it's bad for the customers, and it's bad for the feedback cycle because you don't do it in public. Anyway, I'm going off topic, but like, this is like both fascinating and completely predictable, this outcome in my mind. I think the one about the tools never being properly sunsetted is a great insight. I think this is like the fact that that's 30%. I bet it's way bigger than that. But like it's great that even 30% of people like admitted to that or said that out loud. I think that's wonderful. I don't really know the difference between they monitor different things and they have different features. Like I'm not really sure why those are distinct from each other. That would be an interesting follow-up as well. Also, the bit about the siloed, 32% people say our organization itself is siloed. I think that's a great insight as well of like, yep, that would do it for sure. So what about you, Kurt? What do you think?
Well, one of the interesting aspects that I thought were the group of people, they don't show up on this graph, but a small number of respondents said they don't monitor at all. Now, they use zero monitoring or observability tools. Now, we tried to phrase the question broadly enough so that we weren't going to get people who were being pedantic as like, oh, no, we only use observability. We don't monitor things. We just have observability. We wanted to be inclusive. And yet we still had people who said, we don't. And I don't understand that at all. Now, maybe they're thinking third party, do we pay for an observability tool as opposed to something we build in-house? We did see that in last year's survey. We saw what we interpreted as some disconnects between things we're paying for versus things that we are expending headcount on, but not paying dollars out the door. And so I don't know how much of that factored into this with the people who said, no, we don't have any monitoring or observability tools.
Fun fact, some tools were never properly sunsetted was a write-in from our first rounders. And I'm so glad we went through the pain of getting the feedback and collating from the first rounders. Yep. In other words, I agree with your comment on that particular insight, Steve.
Yeah, we did have a pilot group of folks, about 20 people, who reviewed the survey when we first drafted it. And that was tremendously helpful. If any of you are in the audience, thank you again. It was a tremendous help to improve the quality of the questions that we put out to the community.
Kurt. Well, I guess let's take a moment to read this chart. But potentially the sleeper section in this year's report, efficiency is the enemy of pride. So basically what this says is that being proud of my work, right? So the aggregate response was being proud of my work was the most important aggregate answer. As rank increase, you can see that last little dip there at the very end, that being proud had a bit of a drop, versus being efficient. You can see that as organizational rank increased, being efficient also increased. So just a quick witty comment for you, Kurt, putting you on the spot here.
I'm thinking this is the triumph of pragmatism, that the folks who are higher in the organizational hierarchy are are very concerned with efficiency, which probably translates into dollars and headcount. And they want to get the job done, and they're beholden to the company ideals. And so it's like whether they're proud of the work or not maybe is less important than whether or not they're ticking the boxes. That would be my gloss on it.
How about you, Steve?
Exactly that. Yeah. I mean, there's not much more than that, but like the farther away you get from the work, the higher you get in management, the less you care about the pride that a person has in the work. Like it's really about, did it work or not? How much did you spend? What did you produce? Was it, elegant? Is neither of those things. As practitioners, we might say, but, elegant code actually has like a longer, sustainable, extendable aspect to it, which isn't directly measurable as either cost or immediate outcome. But, like I said, the farther you get from that work, the less you see that nuance. So I think this is a perfect example of that, problem we have with organizations and hierarchies. Like this is just a human problem, like just being shown in the data.
And of course that last category there too, I think also corroborates to some degree.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm no statistics PhD. The feared category was the minority, but still, that little trend line up. Technically, it is a trend line, right? But yeah, it did make me chuckle as well. All right, we're getting close to wrapping up, team. So, hooray, everybody! Automate all the things. Who the heck knew? Right. So each year for the last 4 years, we've asked this question with the exact same wording. And then as a little subscript, we put the Google definition right in the survey, there. So Kurt, we're done, right? We got robots coming over to do all our work, right? We can all go home, or no? What are we looking at here?
Well, I'd like to think that this is a reason to celebrate, but maybe it's my natural paranoia that is a little skeptical. I'm wondering if maybe people are still not the word toil has been around in the industry now for long enough, and it's going through semantic diffusion and doesn't necessarily mean the way it was defined technically in the SRE book, which I think came out 10 years ago now. And so as a consequence, I have to wonder if we're actually measuring the same thing over these last 4 years. We know that our respondents to the survey change from year to year. We know that the companies that they're working for change from year to year. So even though we asked the same question, I'm not necessarily sure that we're measuring the same thing over these 4 years.
Go ahead, Steve. I know you're chomping at the bit.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one thing to consider here is COVID. So the big number was during the bad time, right? And so there was a lot of toil during COVID. We were all a bit preoccupied. Stuff went down. That's one thing to consider. Another possible conflating factor is there are just more people that identify as SREs now. And so if you're asking people who identify as SREs to answer this question, and there's a pool of toil out there, do they all see that pool? And do some of them say no, there's no toil? Maybe they're not actually close to the problem, but the people who have been responding to this, survey since 2020 or before, they still see that same pool of toil, and maybe it's gotten bigger, but just not enough people see it anymore. So this is just a problem with aggregation and statistics in general, is that maybe we're aggregating across the wrong boundaries here. So I still contest that the original definition and kind of procedure that's defined in the book, even though it's not often followed quite this way, is still correct, which is you should survey a team in the shape of a team, not an individual and not a sum of all teams, but like you survey one team and you survey them every quarter or two, and you ask them what they think their toil is. And if they think their toil is this, then you just believe them. You don't compare them to other things, and you don't say, well, these other guys don't call this toil and they do, and blah, blah. Like, you just believe whatever they say, because if they consider it toil, they're right. And so the intent of the whole toil thing is that we should be spending no more than X amount. Inside of Google, we just said 50% out of kind of no good reason, but it seems to have worked. You can set that number to whatever you want, but the goal of it is to make sure that the teams themselves are happy with their workload. If they're doing too much toil, they're not doing engineering. That's the point. But when we start to compare across teams and say, like, well, these guys say they're not doing, and these guys say they are, and this one is, you're losing the point. So I think this, maybe I'm reading too far into this or putting my own interpretation on it a little too much. I think this graph doesn't really show that very well because there's so many confounding problems at play.
Yeah, and forgive me to everyone listening, watching, or who may be watching this later. I had a little slip and forgot to say that this was the median value, right? The exact middle value for the respective years. But otherwise, I do, when we rate this question, I do think of it as I think the correct word is index. So if you go back to your comment, Steve, like interview your own teams year over year and then compare it as an index. That's, why we do put the question in here that way. Alrighty, team. So we're going to work to wrap this up. Unlike our typical webinars or any webinar you might give your time to, where we normally say, hey, here's a demo of our stuff. Do you want to buy it? Right. This isn't that type of webinar, right? We just, Steve, Kurt, myself, the people who helped us write this report, coordinate this webinar. We just wanted to riff and offer some random thoughts on maybe different ways to look at some of the data here. So instead of spamming you, we're just going to simply ask if you could interact with this LinkedIn post. So if you read the report and you appreciate the work that goes into it, give the post a like. If you read the report and you thought something was insightful or maybe a nugget that maybe others should know or hear or think about, offer a comment. But otherwise, this is today's quote unquote advertisement. So please give that an interaction. Otherwise, we're very close on time. But I guess maybe in the last minute or so, Steve, what was your favorite section in this year's report? Did you have one, or what was your least not favorite, maybe?
Oh, I don't know if I had a favorite section. I think I like the fact that this is happening at all. I like the fact that people are engaged with this and people are asking these hard questions, and that there's a diversity in response. That's my favorite part. Like it's the fact that this is not a simple just do this and it's fine, right? Like, we're showing that there's complexity in the system. We're showing that there's complexity in our response to the system, and there's even more complexity in the organization of the people of doing the response to the system. Like, it just grows fractally, and like, this is just like the fact that we have to spend so much time doing this shows that this is not straightforward, and that's my favorite part.
How about you, Kurt?
That's an awesome answer. I wish I had thought of it, Steve. Every time I work through this, I cooperated with you last year, Leo, and then this year working on the survey and the write-up. It's very clear that this is a complicated, nuanced situation, and it's hard to characterize something where we don't have the degrees of freedom that Steve, you described, for instance, with the monitoring tools and how they change over time. there's just not an effective way to capture that level of nuance. But I still think that historically, running this over the last 6 years, that we have to doff our caps to Catchpoint for sponsoring this on an ongoing basis. And I think it's a great longitudinal study, even if the answers are kind of raise more questions.
And that is time. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you to everyone who gave us your time today. We will catch all of you on the flip side. That is a wrap, everyone. Thank you again.